Mental and physical health play an important role in the workplace. We'll learn more about that dynamic when we return. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today, we've been talking about creating a positive workplace environment. The dynamics between the employees and each other and with management are essential to creating a welcoming, safe, and creative atmosphere. But sometimes physical and mental health issues can create another type of conflict in the workplace. Joining me now is Ken Dolan-Del, founder and president of Green Gate Leadership. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Great to be with you, Ciara.
So first, tell us about yourself and your background in the mental health fields.
Sure. Well, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed clinical social worker. And I went, after I got my social work degree, to a family therapy training institute because I wanted to be very well prepared. So I went to an institute that was 3 years in duration, and it was great in that it looked at not only the dynamics of relationships, but more importantly, at the center of relationships are dimensions of power. And so one of the things that we really focused on was things like racism and sexism and homophobia and stigma. And so the work that I did as a therapist, and I've worked in many different settings. I've worked in inpatient psychiatry and outpatient services and private practice and voc rehab. But when I came to work in the corporate world, and that was in 1998, I was able to take this systems perspective and put it on the larger system of the workplace. And that was truly both a privilege and an adventure.
And so what inspired you to start your company?
Well, I worked for 19 years in the corporate world, and I loved the work. I loved the development of programs and the consulting with leaders and the counseling and coaching that I did with individuals. But I also wanted to expand my focus and be able to do more of what I loved and less of the, shall we say, administrivia. And also, my husband and I wanted to move out of the New Jersey, New York City area and come up here because I'm also passionate about nature and I'm building a permaculture environment. And so this was a great place to come. And now I do my speaking, I do my consulting, I do my advising, and I do the things that I love the most with my clients.
And so you were the executive responsible for the behavioral health services team that led Prudential to receive, we have the American Psychological Association's 2017 Organizational Excellence Award. And so tell me about some of the work that led Prudential to receive this distinction.
Well, the first thing I want to say is when we talk about creating a mentally healthy workplace, this is really just about having great leadership. Leadership where everybody is seen as a human being, and leadership in which it doesn't matter what aspects of our life might be challenges for us, whether we live with depression or diabetes or migraines, that it's really okay to be who we are and to come to work and feel like all of us is welcome there. But as you know, there's enormous stigma about mental health, and in fact, the workplace is one of the primary places that stresses people to the point where if they have any predisposition toward depression or anxiety, it may very well come into full life. And so we know that more than half of people will say that work and money are their primary sources of stress. The World Health Organization in 2015 reported that depression is the #1 cause of disability worldwide. So prudent companies are taking stock, and Prudential has a long history of paying attention to employee health. 1911 was their first health and wellness on-site clinic. And so our leadership team began to look at what are we seeing in terms of stress, depression, obesity, all kinds of other health concerns, and putting into place all kinds of programs. The first of which was a definition for health, a definition that looks at health in a multidimensional way, so not just physical, but emotional, social, spiritual, financial, with the idea that we should all be empowered to do the things every day that will help us to be at our best possible health within those dimensions, and then not only at the individual level, and I'm making this little sphere because we look at it as a sphere in our depiction of it, but also that the organization in which we work should be a place that fosters our health instead of erodes our health. Every organization is doing one or the other. Very important to keep in mind. And so leaders are creating the culture within which their team members perform every day. And it's very important for leaders to do all kinds of things that will support the health of their team members. And then also the company can reach out into the community and do lots of things that are helpful there as well. So very multifaceted. We did all kinds of communications and events and work both internally and with partners externally to do things that would break stigma, normalize the fact that many people live with these kinds of conditions, and to in fact showcase leaders who are willing to talk about their own experiences with depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and attack this in many different ways. One of the things that's very important to keep in mind is that creating a culture that goes against the norms, whether that's mental health stigma or the stigma against trans people or people of color or women, that's a long-term effort. And it's not one event where we get together and maybe do some relaxation, or we hear from people who are perhaps different from the norm in some way, or the mainstream in some way, perceived mainstream, I should say. It's an ongoing, multifaceted effort to create an environment in which everybody's welcome, everybody's included, everybody can be him or herself.
And so some leaders say that health is entirely a private matter and should not be a workplace concern. What would you say to that?
So you think about the fact that we spend almost all of our waking hours working,
right?
Whether we're at a particular work site, or we're working remotely, or we're at an event where we're representing our company. So the environment in which we live is affecting our health. It's either supporting it, promoting it, empowering our health, or it's degrading it, it's challenging it. Why would you leave that to chance? That's the question that I always give back to any leader who would say that, is why would you just let that be whatever it may be? And the fact that you're thinking of it in those terms and that you're fragmenting people's experiences in such a way is already an indication to me that there's room for improvement.
Right, and so some people, might suffer both back problems or like migraines, things like that, and they're comfortable, voicing that. But others with, mental health disorders aren't so comfortable. And do you think that that comes into play with the workplace environment and how they've been treated in the past?
Of course it does. And you think about this idea of power and how power is applied. In most areas of our life, in most of civilization, power is power over. Power as domination. And within that way of looking at power, we're always ranking. What's the better way to be? What's the more healthy? What's the more holy? What's the more right way to be? And so men have been empowered over women for forever, and we're fighting that. We see great movement in that direction. White people over people of color. This extends even to the right kind of illness and the not so right kind of. Now, why is it okay for some people to talk about their migraines, their back pain, their cardiac problems, but not the fact that they live with depression or they live with anxiety, which, by the way, these mental health conditions are typically very interwoven with any other kind of significant quote-unquote physical problem. Why can't we mention that we had a rough time with our depression, or we had a rough time with our PTSD, and it be expected that that's just part of the human condition.
Right.
That's just part of life.
All right. Thank you, Ken, so much. And we'll continue our conversation after the break. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today on 22 News in Focus, we've been talking about creating a positive workplace environment and addressing the issues of physical and mental wellness in the workplace with Ken Dolan-Del, founder and president of Green Gate Leadership. Ken, when a client contacts you for help, what are the first questions you have for them? What are you looking for?
Well, I'm looking for what their need is, whether they want me to come and speak as a starting place, which is often the case, or whether there's a particular issue that's cropped up that they would like to start talking about. And really what I'm looking for is what the experience is so far at their workplace and how much of an understanding they have of what it's like to be somebody who comes to work at their organization on a day-to-day basis.
And so what are some of the strategies that you suggest for creating a positive and healthy work environment?
Well, there's so many strategies, but it really does start with leaders at the very top level being self-aware and making an effort to connect with the people around them in a way that is welcoming and embracing and clear in their communications and direction. And there's another piece that's incredibly vital, and that is it's important for leaders at all levels, top on down, to have a good idea of what they're asking of their team members in terms of productivity. Because there's so much stress that exists in most of our workplaces, and many times leaders are so pressured themselves that they don't have a good sense of what they're asking, what's on their team members' plates really. Because if people are overloaded, they begin to have all sorts of problems and show all kinds of difficulties.
And let's talk about the physical work environment. How important is lighting, ventilation, cleanliness, things like that for, somebody's well-being?
Well, we shouldn't work in a filthy environment, right? We should work in an environment that is pleasant to the eye and the senses. It's important for those kinds of baselines to be present, but a lot of times we kind of work where we do because the environment we work in is geared towards a certain kind of function. And also the organization, depending on its state of development, might not have a lot of money to give to aesthetics. But one of the things that it's important to do is for the employees, the workers in an organization, to be asked periodically, what's it like to work here? Do you have any specific suggestions? I know of one organization where there was concern that people were not enjoying the environment, and they were asked, what would you like us to do? And almost unanimously they said, paint the restrooms. That's what mattered to them, because when they took a break, they were in an environment that felt like it was just disrespectful to them.
And let's talk about personnel issues. What do you do if you have a difficult boss?
What do you do if you have a difficult? Well, we've all had difficult bosses, right?
Right.
And I'm gonna interject something here that I think is important. One of the things I coach all of the people I work with on is you really have two jobs. You have the job that you're contracted for today, and then you have the job of developing yourself, knowing what your long-term goals are, developing your network, scanning for maybe there's training I should take that would help me develop the skills that'll help me move forward. That's the job of stewarding your career. And if you are doing that, you're going to be able to manage whatever sort of adversities come up with greater clarity and decisiveness. But if you have a boss who is a problem in one way or another, the first thing you want to think about is, does it make sense to approach him or her directly? Does it make sense to talk with him or her directly? In many cases, that's probably something that you're not going to feel like you're going to do because you've probably already tried that, or you've been given signals in many ways that this is somebody who's using their power in a way that is not, they're not open to that. So at first, I think you should try, if it makes sense, to go directly to your supervisor, your boss. If HR, human resources, is functional in your organization, if you see HR as an honest broker and not a rubber stamp for management, and sometimes that's the case, unfortunately. I apologize to my wonderful HR colleagues who may be listening. Then you would want to speak to human resources. But you're in a tight spot, and it shouldn't be that way. Sometimes you want to do a skip step and go to the next person, but this is why it's so important for supervisors and leaders at all levels to cultivate an environment in which people who are on their team experience them as facilitating, as helping. The best way to use power is to see power not as the right to dominate, but as the responsibility to support shared success. That's power with. So we move from power over, which is domination, to power with. This is the thrust of what I try to do with all of the organizations that I work with, that this is what you're looking for. You're looking for an employee experience that feels like I am engaged in a work mission that I am supported in by the others around me, and certainly by the person who I report to.
Right, and so everybody, will find something stressful at their job. But what about excessive stress in the workplace? You can't control everything, but that might lead to you, failing to do your job properly and then having an issue with management. So how should you go about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's important to know that not all stress is bad. Just getting up in the morning is a stressful experience, in that stress is the experience we have for meeting any challenge. And our temperaments vary tremendously. So some people are going to feel terribly bored if they're not in an emergency room setting. Other people need to have a predictable environment in which the workflow is something they can foresee. But many, many, many people feel greatly overstressed. And if you do, it's your right to talk about workload and expectations. Can I negotiate when this particular piece of work is going to be delivered? Are there pieces of my work that are less important than others that maybe we can put aside? Again, it's important for leaders at all levels to have some idea of what they're asking of the people who report to them, so that they know whether it's too much or whether it's reasonable.
Okay, so making sure that line of communication stays open as well.
It's so important.
All right. Thank you so much, Ken. And we'll have the last word for you after the break, so stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus.